Okay, so in today's video, we have a massive exposure. What Biden actually said to the Israelis when he met up with them, what was his demands, and we actually have an ultimatum which was made to the Israelis and how they reacted. We also have a lot of questions about why Israel is taking its time actually going into Gaza, and there's a lot of new information about it that's going to blow your mind. And of course, we have lots of news here to cover. So let's start with the news, then we go through the geopolitical analysis. So item number one, which is kind of on the news cycle still, is that hospital bombing story in which the Hamas alleged that 500 people died, and they basically blamed the Israelis for bombing it from their planes. And right now we have what I think is the best verified independent source, which is the U.S. National Security Council, that says, hey, we looked at the information ourselves, we looked at the data ourselves, and we concluded Israel had nothing to do with it, based on the lack of crater, based on the fact that this fire started from the bottom up and not from the, from the top down like a bomb would. And the videos that we've seen, this is not an Israeli attack. This seems like a failed launch. So that thing is now put to rest, at least for those who are, objectively seeking the truth. Obviously, there's going to be people who are not convinced, and that's fine. I'm here to give you the facts. You decide how you want to feel about it in the comments below. Would love to read your comments. Number two, we had the UK Prime Minister actually visit Israel. That was very interesting because we had the German Prime Minister. We had obviously President Biden there. Now we have Rishi Sunak. I'm sorry if I screwed up his name. I know I'm not the best with names. So we also had the President Macron from France actually tweet in Hebrew, lots of support for Israel. So we had lots of visits, lots of support from these countries, which is really weird because usually the dynamics of this region is the Palestinians, they do some sort of an acting out, not as crazy as we've seen on October 7th. Then they lash out at Israel. Then Israel starts attacking Gaza or the West Bank, whatever that may be. And then the international community, basically led by these same countries, by the Germans, the French, the UK, and the United States, starts to pressure Israel to stop and cut it out. And then they kind of stop. That's the normal dynamic of this region. It's very weird to see all these people land in Israel and basically say, hey, keep on going. We're 100% behind you. That is completely unprecedented. And I'll explain why I think this is happening. Now, I don't want to scare you too much. But let me give you some context. While all of this was going on, we had the Iranians come out and say, hey, Europe will pay a heavy price for supporting Israel. At the same time, they've actually raised that black flag of war over Tehran, which means a holy war, whatever that means, basically, a call for all Muslims to go to war. So Iranians are basically threatening Europe openly, out in the open, saying, hey, we're going to get you. And they're waving the flags of war. They're talking, a lot of flag. And that's very weird because at this point, it seems that the Iranians have accepted the fact that the rest of the world now, not just Israel, is not okay with them having nuclear bomb. Before this whole thing started, it was pretty much Israel and Benjamin Netanyahu saying, hey, we shouldn't give Iran a bomb. The U.S. was kind of wishy-washy about it. And the rest of the world said, well, just give them the bomb, whatever, right? I think now Iranians understand that, the masks came off. And now it's clear that it's Iran, China, and Russia versus the United States, UK, France, Germany, Italy, and the rest of the civilized world. And now they understand they're not going to get a nuclear bomb because nobody's going to be okay with it. It's not just Israel. So now they're okay making these threats out in the open. And that's no longer just an Israeli issue. And I think that's the biggest loss strategically for Iran in basically launching this proxy attack via Hamas. And I explained multiple times why Hamas is a proxy of Iran. They've lost their PR as far as getting a nuke because they were very, very close. Not saying that they won't ever get a nuke, but this makes it very, very difficult for them. With the sanctions and basically everybody right now and their mom, except Putin and President Xi, was basically not going to give them a nuke because they see how dangerous this is. This is essentially an existential threat to Europe and not just Europe. So the Iranians making this threat basically means, okay, so it's off. All bets are off. Now we're playing a wide open game with the cards. Nobody's hiding anymore. So on the one hand, we have Russia, China, and Iran. And we also heard Putin make threats towards the U.S. We haven't heard that since the Cold War. And nobody reports this in the U.S., which is weird to me. So Putin actually, in case you don't know this, because the U.S. media isn't reporting about this, oddly enough. So Putin actually made a speech, and in that speech he said, the U.S. put some really big ships off the coast of Israel in the Middle East. So in response, we put a bunch of our planes on the patrol mission in the Black Sea, which is in range for our Kinjal. Now, I just want to give you some context. The Kinjal, and that's a Russian missile, hypersonic missile that is allegedly unstoppable by any normal defenses the United States have right now. And it was essentially developed as an area killer. So the Kinjal was developed by Russia to be a destroyer of Navy carriers. So he's basically saying, hey, you put your carriers in the Mediterranean, cool. We're going to put our planes in range. And he literally said, this is in range with the Kinjal. He said, I'm not making a threat, but just so you know that now we got you in range. So it was a threat. So we got Putin making threats towards the U.S. Hasn't happened since the Cold War. Iran basically saying to Europe, we're going to annihilate you. So the war is heating up, but this is still a Cold War because Russia isn't fighting the U.S. and Iran isn't fighting the Europeans. It's now still as a Cold War. And at this point, Israel and Gaza seems to be just the opening arena. The first quarter of this multi-quarter game. There's probably 3 more quarters to be played here, and I don't know where the next ones are, but this seems to be the kind of the opening quarter of this. And a lot of what's going to happen in Israel is going to dictate how this plays out next, because don't forget, you have the UAE and the Saudis and all the Gulf countries that really are important sitting on the sideline trying to figure out where their allegiances are going. Especially Qatar. Qatar is very affiliated with the U.S., but on the other hand, they're playing a double game. They're really supportive of the terrorist attacks and all the stuff that happened in Israel. So the Qatarians are trying to play a double game. The Saudis and the UAE are basically also trying to figure out where their allegiances are. So this is a very complex game that's going on right now. Now, on top of all of this, we also have some new insights that came out from the attack, which is going to blow your mind. So they found actual narcotics on the bodies of the terrorists that they've captured over there in Israel. And apparently they were drugged up with this drug that's supposed to be some sort of a poor man's cocaine called Captagon or Coptagon. I don't know about anything about that, but apparently what they're telling me, it's very similar to what ISIS was using when they were doing their attacks, the terrorist attacks. And this tactic of drugging up your soldiers so they become more vicious and more ruthless, it's actually a Nazi tactic. If you go back in history, 80 years ago, this is literally what Hitler was doing with the Nazi soldiers. They were dragging them up so they will be completely unsensitive to what's going on and basically go and do the atrocities that they've done. Now, there's a lot of riots going on the West Bank right now, which is not controlled by Hamas. It's controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And the West Bank is heating up right now. We have a lot of riots going on, a lot of pro-Hamas riots, actually, in which basically the protesters are saying, hey, Palestinian Authority, we don't respect you. We support Hamas. Let us go crazy against Israel, pretty much. And just to explain to you, the reason there was no elections for a long ass time in the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is because if there were elections, Hamas would have won massively. So the Palestinian Authority is trying to contain all of this because they're trying to stay in power and out-survive Hamas. So when Hamas goes down, they get to take over Gaza, which is, I'll talk about it later in the video, how it played out in the beginning. But it's getting more and more problematic because they're Hamas supporters and they're going crazy. So I don't know how long they can hold on to this. And on the other front, and we'll talk about it in a second, and I'll explain to you why Israel is actually fighting 6 or maybe even 7 fronts potentially in this war. On the other side, you have the Hezbollah on the northern side of Israel, basically increasing the amount of attacks, shooting rockets today at major Israeli cities on top of anti-tank missiles and shooting and incursions. So the northern front is heating up, but still not at war, but it's getting risky and it's getting dicey. Now, what happened, and I'll talk about it here in a second, is that when President Biden was in Israel, he made an ultimatum to the Israelis. And that ultimatum was very, very clear. He basically said, hey, look, you're not going to get my support unless you're going to give them some humanitarian aid. And he's basically saying to Benjamin Netanyahu, look, I'm going to save you from yourself. You don't want to give them aid. I hear you. I know where you're coming from with the hostages and everything. But if you're not going to give them some humanitarian aid, the public opinion is going to stop your operations in Gaza way faster than it should be stopped. Giving them humanitarian aid is in your best interest, so this war can continue longer with backing from the international community. We cannot back you for long if you're not going to give them food and water and medical supplies. Now, whether you agree with this or not, this is what happened, and obviously Benjamin Netanyahu caved, and he actually agreed to that. Now, again, whether you think he's done the right thing or the wrong thing, it's for you to decide. But this is what happened in this little get-together that happened with Blinken, Biden, and Benjamin Netanyahu. So the compromise they worked out is that they're going to get food and medical supplies, but no gasoline. And the caveat from Benjamin Netanyahu is that if Hamas steals these supplies, like they stole the gasoline from UNRWA a couple days ago, then the bets are off and basically there's no more humanitarian aid. Now, also, the other thing that came out of it is that all the refugees can focus in this place called El Mawasi in the Gaza Strip. It's a little tiny place, but it's an open field. So there's nowhere to shoot rockets from. So Hamas can't shoot rockets from it. So Arif basically said, look, we're not going to attack that place at all. If you want a refuge, go to that place and stay there. But that's basically the compromise that happened with Biden and Netanyahu. Look, Biden doesn't want a regional war. He's trying to contain this as much as possible, but he understands Netanyahu has to take out Hamas. So I think in a way he was trying to help. Whether it helped or not, it's for you to decide. Now, Biden actually walked back his support to Israel a little bit today by tweeting that all Palestinians are not Hamas supporters. Now, look, whether you agree with the statement or not, I'll talk about it in a second. Surely not 100% of them support Hamas. That factually is true, but look, the majority of them support Hamas. That's just the reality. Why did he walk it back? Why did he say that? Well, he had to. Look, he has a democratic base that believes that to be the case. So he has to play to his democratic base. So he had to say it to kind of play ball. I don't think it stands in the way of what he promised to Netanyahu, and I'll explain why. So first of all, factually, yeah, he's factually right. But look, according to all polls that happened in Gaza, like 70% support for Hamas there right now. So if they had an actual election right now, Hamas will take 70% of the vote. Same thing in the West Bank. So they are very popular over there. So it's not like people are being oppressed against their will to vote for Hamas. You can say that they're indoctrinated and the education system basically, brainwashes them for sure. But Hamas is very popular there. And no Palestinian is going to condemn Hamas. That's just a fact. Now, why this doesn't change anything? Because look, Biden made a financial decision. They're trying to save the Israel, US, and Saudi Arabia deal. That deal is worth a lot of money, a lot of energy dollars. Now, to take out Hamas is the missing piece. Without Hamas, they can actually go through with this deal because it cleans up this whole mess. If Hamas keeps on bidding in Israel and doing this crazy stuff, Israel will have to retaliate, and it's going to put strain on the Saudi-Israeli relationships and Iran and all this regional crap. So when you take out Hamas of the equation and you generate some peace and quiet in this region, that deal can go through and make a lot of money. So this is a financial decision. Hamas needs to go because Hamas is costing the U.S. a lot of money. Now, you can debate and disagree, but that's just the way it is. Every single decision here, you got to follow the money. Just to kind of summarize where we stand right now with this. Look, I think right now on the U.S. side, this is the realization that this is his world. This is how Biden views this. Gaza won't be safe, won't be stable until Hamas is gone, number one. Number two, Israel, based on what we saw on October 7th, won't be safe until Hamas is gone. Israel obviously has a duty to protect its civilians, citizens, and its land. The conclusion is Hamas has to go. So if you believe these three things, you believe that Hamas has to go. I think this is where Biden's at. Now, on top of that, you have a vested economic interest in creating a deal with the Saudis, which Hamas and Iran is trying to prevent. And if you take out Hamas, Iran doesn't have that proxy to try and make problems with. So all of this leads us to the fact that Iran is not going to get its nuke. Iran is going to lose its proxy as Hamas, and Israel will have to take out Hamas with the full blessing of Biden, despite his democratic base. He will play the right games and he will say the right things, but he will support Israel. Now, why is Israel taking its time with this whole thing? Why are they slowing down the ground operation? Well, you have to understand, Israel literally is fighting on 6 fronts. I'm going to explain every single one of them here, and they're actually very interesting. Number one, you have the northern front, potentially heating up with Hezbollah. 130,000 rockets, tunnels that lead from Lebanon to the depth of Israel, which they don't know exactly where they are. So once Hezbollah launches this attack, we're talking about thousands of rockets every day and actual Hezbollah terrorists deep inside Israel, just like we saw with Hamas, but much greater numbers, much better equipped. Number two, obviously, we have the second front, which is Gaza. No need to mention this. We obviously have the West Bank, which can potentially explode to a third front easily. We're already seeing the riots there right now. We have Syria, which is basically controlled by Russia and Iran. Not very likely to develop, but who knows? We have Jordan and Egypt, which have made peace agreements with Israel, but threatened war over the past 2 days, basically saying, hey, if we're going to get any refugees here, which we don't want, this is a declaration of war. Both of them said it. So God knows about that. And obviously, we have 2 million Arabs who are living inside Israel, Israeli citizens, but not very pro-Israel. I know that sounds weird, but this is the Middle East. And if just 10% of them, just 200,000 of those 2 million become extremists and they want to attack Israel from inside, we have 200,000 very well armed, by the way, people. Yes, Google it. Basically causing mayhem from inside Israel. So that's the sixth front. That's very, very complicated. On top of it, you have to consider, I mean, I don't want to as an Israel, you're going to say to yourself, well, if I'm Israel, I don't want to overdo it. I'm going to lose the support of the Saudis, right? The Saudis are waiting for me to clean up Hamas without too much PR damage so they can make a deal with me. And that's also one of Biden's main considerations, basically telling to the Israelis, hey, don't overdo it. We'll still have that deal with the Saudis. So that whole thing is actually a huge mess in itself. And that's why you're seeing all this maneuvering right now of the U.S. In Israel, because this is a major, major game that's going on right now. Major Cold War, energy deals, lots of money, lots of considerations. What you're hearing in the media is just a little tiny taste. Now, I hope this video was helpful and you got something out of it. I really appreciate it. If you guys want, if this video gets, let's say, 1,000 likes, which is highly unlikely, if it gets 1,000 likes, I'll make a video explaining the entire origin story of the Palestinian and the Israelis, how it all started, who's to blame for it, who lost a major chance, who oppressed who stole whose lands, the whole story. If you want to know about it, I've already took one crack at it, but I'm going to make a super, super cool video, but only if it hits 1,000 likes. As always, I don't have a Patreon for this channel, so if you want to donate to a charity on my behalf. Tell them Tom sent you. I'll see you in the next video.